Welcome Truth Seekers. We've got Mark Devlin to do a talk for us today. I don't know what it's about.
Matching t-shirts.
Matching t-shirts. Something about this pandemic, I think. So switch your phones off or put them on silent, whatever, because we don't want to miss a thing here. And I'm sure we'll have a good day. And he's got books for sale, he's got t-shirts, everything. I'm sure we're going to learn a lot today, Mark. Thank you.
Hope so. Thank you. Right, sorry for the delay, folks. There's always some technical issue that arises, particularly when you're a Luddite like me. I had hoped to be able to embed some video content into this presentation, and I did everything today that I've done previously to get video into it, but it's not working. So I'm going to have to explain what's in the videos, and then if anyone at break time wants to watch the videos, I've got them on my computer. You might just want to come over and look at them on there if you choose. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Cool. Alright, so a lot of you might know me through being a researcher into the shenanigans that go on in the corporate music industry. That was my specialist subject. I've been researching that for 10 years now. And that was the case all the way up until the start of this year. But I've had one or two things on my mind and one or two distractions this year that have kind of kept me away from looking at that area. And in all good conscience, I couldn't continue to research that subject area when so much else was going on, which was kind of calling for me to put my input into that. Talking about the madness situations in which we've all been living this year. So this presentation is giving proof and evidence, using the style of research that I did when I was looking into the music industry, of foreknowledge of this ridiculous COVID-19 narrative long before 2020. We're talking many, many years ago. And it appears in two main forms. There's predictive programming, which we'll get into, and that ties in very much to my work into the music industry and Hollywood movies. And there's also documentation and real-life events. And all of these point to foreknowledge on the part of the architects of this narrative that this was coming a long time ago. And I think the main purpose of this presentation, I delivered it about a month ago in Birmingham and I've put it online. I really want this to be used to wake up normies and regular members of society who haven't yet twigged that the government is not there to keep us safe during this virus pandemic. In fact, the whole thing is designed to control and surveil and subjugate us. Unfortunately, there are many members of the public who haven't caught up with this yet, and they're still buying the lies and the deceptions that are being peddled by the government and the mainstream media. And I hope that by presenting these proofs, because to me, what I'm about to show you are absolute proofs, if we can get new recruits onto the side of truth who are prepared to accept that there's way more to this than we're being told, then there's a lot of value in that. Because right now, even though there are people waking up by the day, we still don't have nearly enough people on the right side in this battle, and we need to get the numbers over. So I hope this information will be useful in that. Probably all of you will be familiar with these concepts already, and as I say, the main purpose of putting this presentation together and putting it online as I did was to wake up some new recruits. But let's get into it anyway. So here we are in COVID 1984, and if you told anyone on New Year's Day 2020 that this is how we would be living our lives by late summer, they'd have told you to get off the crack pipe and you know, go check yourself into the nearest psychiatric institution. But nevertheless, here we are. It's a bit of a snippet there from Nick Kollerstrom's book on the coronavirus, which is doing the rounds at the moment. But in terms of predicting this situation, we have this dynamic of predictive programming. And I presented this in Musical Truth Volume 1. And I used many examples of TV shows, Hollywood movies, pop videos, cartoons, magazine articles that seem to foreshadow real-world events that were known to be coming. So my description of it in the first book was: predictive programming is the practice of encoding visual clues and symbols into works of popular culture aimed at large audiences, which depict a real-world event yet to happen or currently happening. In recognition of the powerful influence of the subconscious mind on an individual's psyche, images are subtly conveyed in encoded form which foreshadow events which are known to be coming. And the classic for this is the events of 9/11 in 2001. There have been somewhere around 400 examples that have been identified. encoded into movies and TV shows and other popular culture vehicles that pertain to the specific events of 9/11. So this is from the movie Independence Day. You get a close-up of a stopwatch counting down, and it just happens to be focused on 9/11/01, which was the exact date of the events of September 11th. And this movie was in 1996, 5 years before. From 2 years before, 1999, we got the original Matrix movie, and we get a close-up of Neo's passport, and the expiry date just happens to be the 11th of September 01. So they're embedding this date into the subconscious mind of the general public using movies to do it. When people are off their guard, they think they're just getting entertained, they're escaping into the wild world of fantasy, but in fact they're being conditioned to accept certain things which are going to be coming. And this is a good example of the satanically inverted society in which we live, where everything is upside down and back to front. So we're entrained to think of movies as escapism and wild fantasy and fiction, and we're entrained to think of the BBC Evening News as telling us the truth. Whereas in fact, the opposite is the case. The BBC Evening News and all other mainstream media outlets are giving you lies, deception and propaganda, and in contrast, many movies and TV shows are telling you the truth of our reality, except most people don't recognise it as being the truth. But it's been going on forever. Here are multiple examples of 9/11 predictive programming in movies leading up to 2001. You've got 9/11 represented on clocks and depictions of the Twin Towers exploding and all kinds of other events which now look rather familiar to us. This is a compendium of cartoons from 1976 going through to the 90s, which depict various aspects of 9/11. So you can see decades before that event, it was being subliminally implanted into culture to get the public used to these ideas, so that when they got the official account of events in 2001, there was already a familiarity with the narrative in the subconscious mind. Not that anyone would recognise it, because that's how subliminals work, but nevertheless these ideas would have been implanted into their psyche, and that familiarity with the event, when the newsreader tells you what's going on, helps to perpetuate the official story of it. This is a record sleeve from a rap group called The Coup. It's an album called Party Music. It was released in June 2001, so it's just a few weeks before the events of September 11th. And on it you've got the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center going up in an explosion in exactly the same way that we saw in September. And you've got the front man of the group down here holding a kind of remote controlled detonator, like he's just set off an explosion. We won't get into arguments about directed energy weapons and thermite and stuff here, because the main idea of predictive programming is not necessarily what specifically happened in the event, it's what you're being asked to believe happened. So we've got many examples of predictive programming pertaining to these false flag terror events, ISIS and such. They're a bit quiet lately, aren't they? Maybe they've all gone down with COVID. Can't think why.
They've all turned Black Lives Matter.
Well, yeah, they're out on Antifa marches probably. Now, of course, everyone wears a mask, so everyone can be a bloody ISIS terrorist and not get a second look. But when we had this spate of ISIS terror events, often there had been predictive programming that related to aspects of that. And many of these terror events were hoaxes, and they had fictional elements embedded in them, the use of crisis actors and such. But it doesn't matter that the event might not be entirely genuine, it's the official version of it that you get presented on the news that they want predictive programming to work on. And so it was the case with 9/11. This is an absolute classic from 1979 from Supertramp, the British rock group. They had an album called Breakfast in America, and the cover of it depicts a scene from an aeroplane window coming in over the Manhattan skyline with the World Trade Center towers still intact, waitress in orange, carrying orange juice, orange relating to 33 and Freemasonry, so we've got some of that imagery going on in there. But that's the front cover of that album image. But somebody worked out that if you do a mirror image reversal of it, you get some interesting things happening. So now, above the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, you've got a 9 and an 11. And this scene is, of course, at breakfast time in the morning, which is when the events of 9/11 went off, and it's a scene from an aeroplane window. So you might argue that it's wild coincidence, but the odds of it being so are probably several billion to one. So it's one for coincidence theorists. I think it's far more likely that it smacked of pre-knowledge on the part of whoever put that sleeve together. Going all the way back now to 1967, this is when work had initially started on the construction of the World Trade Center towers. And you got David Rockefeller, that nice man. I'm sure we were all very saddened to hear of his passing the other year. So there he is, sitting in his office window with a view of Manhattan down below him, and the Rockefellers were very instrumental in the construction of the World Trade Center towers. But if you do a close-up on his watch, I don't know how people discover these things, but they do, then the hands just happen to be set to a 9 and an 11 of all the times it could have been. And then somebody also worked out that if you go inside that very magazine, you get this ad here where the guy is wearing a sweatshirt with what appear to be 2 twin towers on. So again, that could be coincidence, or it could smack of pre-knowledge. So that brings us to this current coronavirus. I can't take that word seriously. COVID-19. I'm just so sick of these mantras. COVID-19, pandemic. I'm so sick of hearing these words. But, you know, this is the world that we're living in 2020. And it turns out that when it comes to this COVID-19 situation, there's no shortage of predictive programming clues of the same nature that we've just seen. So there's this novel that came out by the author Dean Koontz in 1981, nearly 40 years ago, called The Eyes of Darkness. There's an interesting snippet from it where he's talking about the release of a deadly virus from a laboratory in the Chinese city of Wuhan, would you believe? They call the stuff Wuhan 400 because it was developed at their rDNA labs outside of the city of Wuhan, and it was the 400th viable strain of man-made microorganisms created at that research centre. Quite the coincidence. Then we had a book by the author Sylvia Browne, who presents herself as something of a psychic, a mystic. She makes predictions for the future. This book, End of Days, came out in 2008, and in it she stated, in around 2020, a severe pneumonia-like illness will spread throughout the globe. She was no flat earther. Attacking the lungs and the bronchial tubes and resisting all known treatments. Almost more baffling than the illness itself will be the fact that it will suddenly vanish as quickly as it arrived. I like that bit. Attack again 10 years later, not so good, and then disappear completely. Yeah, good. So she got the first bit right. We'll have to wait and see if she was correct with her other predictions. Now, this is the first of the movie excerpts that I had, so I'm going to have to explain what was in it, because unfortunately I couldn't get the videos to render. As I say, in the break, if anyone wants to come and see the original videos, I've got them on my MacBook there, so you can just watch them on the small screen. But there was a TV adaptation of Stephen King's Dead Zone stories, which came out in the early 2000s. This particular episode, which was released in 2003, portrays a pandemic which comes out of nowhere, and you have various characters in this city who are working out how best to react to this deadly virus, which they say originated in China. And the initial measures that they take are to lock everything down, so they use the phrase lockdown. They talk about shutting schools, they talk about getting people to stay inside their homes, they talk about the wearing of masks to prevent the spread of the virus. And towards the end of the narrative, they're working out how they can best combat this thing. There's talk of chloroquine as an anti-malarial drug to treat the effects of the virus. And this sounds very similar to hydroxychloroquine, which has been touted by Donald Trump, and there's been much talk of it in the United States as a potential cure for COVID-19, if the thing existed in the first place. So we've got so many elements of what we've been hearing in the news of 2020 in this TV show of 2003. And when you see them all in rapid succession, it's like you're watching, you know, a news broadcast from this year. Many other Hollywood movies appear to have foreshadowed what we're now dealing with. There was a movie called Outbreak in the 90s with Dustin Hoffman that talked about, you know, so-called global pandemic. Then you had this movie in 2011 starring Matt Damon and others called Contagion. And I had a couple of snippets of this where the characters are talking about how this deadly virus is affecting everything, and they're using terms again like lockdown, social distancing, and all these other buzzwords and phrases that we now have. So in 2011 there was talk of social distancing and putting everything into lockdown to deal with this situation. So, you know, one or two of these you might be able to write off as a lucky guess or just one of those things. But when it keeps happening, when you see the patterns form, to my thinking, you've got to be in a very heavy state of denial to still think all this is just coincidence. You know, at what point are you going to start acknowledging that there was foreknowledge of this? To me, these are all proofs. Then we have the movie Captain America, which is also from 2011. Behind this character's right shoulder, you have a Corona beer on the advertising billboard here in Times Square. And you have an image of what we've been presented as the visual depiction of the virus, the way it's supposed to look, that hideous kind of shape that we keep getting. That appears on a billboard behind him as well in the same scene. And then below, on another of these billboards, you've got the phrase, "By George, we did it." I don't know if that refers to George Floyd or George Soros. One or the other. Now, Madonna, this one's for Dawn. Where is she? Actually, you know, it was Dawn that put me onto this the last time I was up here. Yeah, because I didn't know about this performance. This is Madonna at the 2019 Eurovision Song Contest. Now, I thought this thing had been scrapped years ago. To me, the Eurovision, I've got memories of the Eurovision Song Contest with Bucks Fizz and bloody Brotherhood of Man on. And it was always this corny, cheesy sort of naff show that nobody admitted to watching. But in recent years, it seems it's joined all these other large-scale music shows like the Grammys, the VMA Awards, the Super Bowl halftime show in being very overtly occult and ritualistic. It's got all kinds of dark occult symbolism embedded in it, and the performances themselves come off as like some sort of occult ritual. And the Eurovision has now joined in that trend. So in the 2019 show, you had Madonna coming out with a patch over one of her eyes, go figure. She's introducing her Madam X alter ego, and she's surrounded by dancers that are wearing gas masks. They step on stage for no apparent reason wearing gas masks, and then at one point in the performance she blows on them, and there's a sound of like a gale force wind, and they all drop down dead, as if they've been afflicted by some deadly virus, perhaps. She starts off the performance by saying they are so naive, they have no idea that we know about them. And I don't really know what she means about that, but that does kind of tie into the Q narrative, which I'll be exploring in part 2, where you have the idea that there's this group working on a plan known as the Q plan, and the idea is to take down certain key players within the deep state cabal from the inside. So what she said there about they have no idea what we've got on them and they're so naive is kind of consistent with that. But as I say, we'll look at that some more in part 2. So then she has this other performer, I'm being very kind referring to him as that, by the name of Quavo, who comes on. He's a rapper, allegedly, but all his stuff is drenched in auto-tune, making him sound like a bloody robot, but that's the way things are done these days. And they start singing this nice, jolly little song, and the lyrics go along the lines of, not everybody here is going to make it, not everyone is coming to the future. Interesting lyrics. So this was May of 2019, when it appears this performance was being used to foreshadow what was known to be coming, and Madonna would have been, I would suggest, in the know. On the back of the album, which appeared in the wake of that performance, you have Madonna's gloved hands typing away at a typewriter, and the brand of it just happens to be Corona, of all the brands it could have been. I did have another example from the music world here. It was a video by an act called Dr. Creep, and the song was called Pandemic, and it was released in 2018. And it's a kind of hardcore rap video, and it's got all kinds of dystopian, nightmare, Orwellian images in it of a pandemic sweeping the world, and people in gas masks and all kinds of civil unrest. And at one point in the lyrics, in the middle of these very quick-fire lyrics, he makes a reference to the 2020 coronavirus in a song released in 2018. Another lucky guess. So then, staying on the theme of Corona typewriters, we have Tom Hanks, whose name has come up a fair bit this year in certain narratives. We'll probably touch some more on Tom Hanks in part 2 as well. But we were told very early on in this whole situation that Tom Hanks and his wife, when they were in Australia doing some filming there, had come down with coronavirus, and he was one of the first celebrities who's said to have been affected by this thing. So when he was giving interviews about it, he just happened to mention that in Australia, in the luggage that he'd taken with him, he just happened to have brought a typewriter with him. Because, I mean, we all do it, right? We all go on holiday and we put a typewriter in our suitcase. It's a very natural thing to do. And of course, it just happens to be the Corona brand of typewriter. And Tom Hanks seemed to go to great lengths to mention in this interview that he had a Corona typewriter in his luggage with him. So there's more subliminal manipulation of the general mindset going on there. And on top of that, we also got this story in the mainstream press of Tom Hanks taking this Australian boy named Corona under his wing. From what I've heard, Tom Hanks and children aren't a very good mix. And we'll probably hear some more about that in due course. More examples from the music world. Very early on, in March, we had this fella, Michael Stipe, the singer with the group REM. And he made a video reinforcing the official narrative that was coming from the government, that we must all stay at home, lock ourselves away, don't go out, don't see family and friends. And this video was released during the week when, in Ireland, they managed to close all the pubs in the week of St. Patrick's Day. Now, if they try to pull this stunt 30 years ago and shut all the pubs in Ireland on St. Patrick's Day, I like to think there would have been revolutions in the streets and riots overnight. But in 2020, it all went by without a hitch. And I think this speaks to the great job of social engineering that has been done these past few years in getting the population ready for, again, what was known to be coming. One comment that I've heard quite a lot from various people over the months, and it's an observation I've made myself on my videos, is there seems to be a distinct lack of what you might call real men around anymore. Warriors who, when faced with tyranny, when faced with threats to their rights and freedoms and the rights and freedoms of those around them, would come together, form a kind of militia and present some very strong pushback to what was attempted to be done. But we've not seen that. What I've seen, myself, is a lot of women stepping up. When it comes to these protest demos, there have been many women making some very empowering and inspiring speeches. Lots of women have been making YouTube videos, and they've really been fighting our corner in this whole thing. I feel that there's been a social engineering agenda that's been in place for many years to feminise men. It's a general statement, obviously, but we've heard all kinds of suggestions like estrogen, female hormones have been seeping into the water supply and the food supply, and they've been getting absorbed by men. And the opposite thing has been happening. Testosterone has been getting absorbed by females. There's been a blurring of the genders, and it's resulted in a lot of men just being neutered and being feminised to the point that they don't feel to stand up and become warriors in a way that they might have done in previous generations. I think that's what's been going on. And that's why I say, if they tried to pull this stunt 20 or 30 years ago, I think there would have been some major resistance and some major pushback. But in 2020, no problem. Even in Ireland, even closing the pubs on St. Patrick's Day. No revolution overnight. So Michael Stipe is what I would refer to as a lifetime actor. This is a concept that I discuss in Musical Truth Volume 2, where you get public figures who are presented to us as one thing or the other. Maybe they're a rock star, maybe they're a Hollywood actor, maybe they're a politician, and you think of them in that way. So when you see Michael Stipe, most people think of him as a singer in a rock group. But when you do some delving into their family backgrounds, their ancestry, and some of their affiliations, you come to discover lots more about them. And in many cases, they come from family bloodlines that have been put into various influential and prominent positions in society through successive generations. So you often find rock singers and Hollywood actors whose fathers might have been politicians or statesmen or university lecturers or governors of some state or other, or mayors of some town or other. And this is a trend that just keeps popping up time and time again. So a pattern starts to emerge, and as I say, I've done a lot of research into the whole concept of lifetime actors, and I would suggest that this guy is one. So he's singing in the group REM when it suits the controllers of this narrative to have him doing that, but whenever these people are needed to prop up some agenda or other, and push some kind of narrative, then they do exactly what they're told. So he made his video in March saying, stay at home, folks. And the interesting thing about it is he stated in that video, we'll celebrate in 4 months. So 4 months on from March was July, and in July everything started to open up again very slowly in the United States. You know, that's when bars and shops and cinemas started to open up in July. So it's almost as if he knew what the script was, and he could say with some accuracy that in 4 months we'll celebrate because things will be starting to get back to normal. Then we have Lady Gaga. Yeah, exactly. Who, it turns out, some genealogical research throws up the fact that she just happens to be a cousin of Madonna. There we go again. And both of them are in turn cousins of Ellen DeGenerate, who is another name that has cropped up in this whole situation. So Lady Gaga, again, I would suggest she's another lifetime actor. We think of her as a pop singer, but she's much more than that, and she's very deeply embedded into the dark occult. She has a close personal affiliation with Marina Abramovich of spirit cooking fame. So Lady Gaga was tasked with curating this One World Together at Home concert, which happened in April. And the idea was, hey, who cares if you can't go out? Just stay in your house, because we've lined up all these rock stars that are going to perform for you from their living rooms. Who needs to go to an arena or a stadium to see Mick Jagger or Elton John or Paul McCartney, whoever he is, when they're right there in their living room performing for you and you can watch it on your screen at home? Isn't that great? And it's all part of the normalisation of doing everything now remotely and virtually by screen. We've had this relentlessly drummed into us. You know, you now have to do your doctor's appointments by Zoom, and people are doing yoga and meditation classes over a Skype call, and people are waving hi to their mum. They don't go and visit her because they might kill her if they breathe on her, you know. But the next best thing is wave to your mum on the screen and show her what you're cooking for lunch. And it's just getting this idea that we can do anything we want to from our homes. We don't have to go out. We can just do it all remotely. And this concert was reinforcing that aspect of the mind control. So you had all these obedient players in the game just doing what they were called upon to do as well and take part in this whole thing. Now the irony of this situation to me is that people being forced to stay at home will have had a major effect on the mental health of untold numbers of people. Human beings are social animals. We need social interaction as part of our normal human experience. It's built into us. It's not the same to do everything on a screen. You need to be in a room with other people. You need to be able to read their facial expressions, pick up on their energy, their vibrations. But we've been prevented from doing that, and people that have bought the official lies have been prevented from seeing their own mothers and their own grandkids. And that will have led to many mental health issues. And I wonder just how many suicides have happened as a result of people being forced to stay indoors. We'll never get the accurate figures on this. But people have been emailing me. I get so much correspondence now, and people tell me that members of their family have committed suicide because they just couldn't cope with the desolation and the loneliness of these last few months, particularly people that live on their own. So this has been playing havoc with mental health. Now, it turns out Lady Gaga's mother, Cynthia Germanotta, was named Goodwill Ambassador to the United Nations World Health Organization, and she was the ambassador for mental health. So you got the daughter pushing this idea that, isn't it great we can all stay at home, don't go out folks, don't leave your house, just watch your screen. And then her mother is apparently acting as an ambassador for mental health because she cares. I mean, you couldn't make this shit up, and you don't have to. Something interesting that I discovered in the midst of all this, which ties back again to my research into the music industry and the style of research that went into Musical Truth Volume 2, Grant Shapps is one of these government ministers who's been quite prominent through all this. A few weeks ago he was recommending that people always carry a face mask with them whenever they leave the house. And he said, you know, as long as you've got a mask on you, you don't have to worry about getting caught short if you need to nip in a shop or something. So it's the normalisation of mask wearing. Maybe getting us ready for when they tell us we've got to wear masks all the time, every time we do literally leave the house. But Grant Shapps is just another, you know, treacherous government minister doing what he's told. So isn't it interesting, even from Wikipedia you can find this out, that Grant Shapps' brother Andre Shapps is a musician. He was a member of Big Audio Dynamite playing keyboards. Big Audio Dynamite was a spin-off group from The Clash, and their cousin Mick Jones was a founding member of both The Clash and Big Audio Dynamite. So we've got a direct connection there between the world of politics and the world of music, and it relates to a group, The Clash, who were always portrayed as being anti-establishment, you know, this edgy kind of new wave band, anything but an expression of the establishment. They were very much against all of that. But were they really? We have another example from The Clash as well of Joe Strummer, one of the founding members. His real name was John Graham Mellor, and he was born in Ankara, Turkey. So it turns out that his father, Ronald Ralph Mellor, who was an MBE, was a clerical officer, later attaining the rank of second secretary in the Foreign Service. So he was a diplomat. So now we've got two of the founding members of The Clash with direct family ties back into the world of politics. And it starts to look less and less like The Clash were this grassroots organic group that just got together and strummed a few guitar riffs and wrote a few songs and formed a band, and rather more like they were a manufactured band that were placed in the position that they were to be one of the leaders of that whole new wave scene when it kicked off at the end of the 1970s. There are many other examples of this as well. This is not in isolation. If it were, you might be able to write it off as one of those things, but we have many other examples of this. So that was like a little throwback into my regular style of research. When it comes to the wearing of masks then, it seems there has been plenty of subliminal manipulation to get people ready for this idea as well over the years. So somebody put me onto this Netflix movie called Hedgehogs, released in 2016 by Chinese directors, about a respiratory virus in humans. This is a big part of this narrative as well, isn't it? Getting us to think of other humans as dangerous, as potential threats to our health or even to our lives. It's being portrayed that the big problem here is humans breathing. The very act of existing and breathing is what's posing a big threat in all this. It's similar to what we got through Extinction Rebellion and Greta Thunberg last year. What happened to her? She's been a bit quiet this year as well. And in that whole narrative, we were being told that the planet is facing these devastating threats which have all been brought about by human activity. You know, everything's warming up, and it's because we bad humans are going out in our cars and we're taking airplane flights, and we're consuming all this plastic which is ending up in the ocean, and it's causing all this ecological damage. Question I've got is, what's supposed to happen to all these masks that people are now being told to wear? So we've got millions of people being told they have to wear a face mask every day. We're being told that the blue disposable ones that look like surgeon's masks are only effective up to 4 hours. So the official recommendation is that after 4 hours you discard it and put on a new one. Like me, you may have seen many of these masks being discarded in the street. I walk through a town or city centre, I see masks on the floor, they're just thrown into regular waste paper baskets. So if the masks work, as we're told that they do, and if they prevent you from spreading a deadly disease to somebody else, and in turn you're protected from them, then presumably many of these masks would be full of spores, you know, virus, disease spores, and when you dash the mask away, you're putting those spores with it into the bin or onto the floor or whatever. So that would appear to be a bit of a health hazard, but we're not given any official advice as to how to dispose of these masks. We've got all kinds of ridiculous things going on now, like when you go into certain pubs, Wetherspoons are guilty of this. They're giving you a one-time paper menu, and when you've looked at the menu, they dispose of it. They tell you that they do. Many pubs and restaurants are giving you plastic cutlery, because the virus lives on, you know, metal ones, but you're okay with plastic. And then they throw the plastic knives and forks away after every customer. A little bit wasteful, don't you think? And I was in Scotland a couple of weeks ago, staying in a hotel, and the hotel was proudly boasting that they're now changing the shower curtain between each guest. So they're ripping down the plastic shower curtain, throwing it away, and putting another one up because it's full of virus, you know. So how wasteful is that? Where's all this plastic going? Aren't we supposed to be concerned about all the plastic we're throwing away? So why is it suddenly okay to be discarding shower curtains and plastic knives and forks? So in the Extinction Rebellion narrative, it was humans are bad because they're heating up the planet, and now it's humans are bad because we breathe. And that's where the masks come in. So we were subliminally prepared for masks. I'm told, because I don't watch TV, but others have told me, that there was this TV show on primetime Saturday evenings at the start of this year called The Masked Singer.
Oh, yes.
And the idea is that a celebrity comes out disguised in a mask, and you have a panel that have to try and guess from their performance who it is behind the mask. This got very occultic and ritualistic in some of the imagery. You know, this is trauma-based mind control imagery. It's all very creepy when you know what these images represent. But this is another image from The Masked Singer. So that was at the very start of this year, kicking off in January. So there was some subliminal entrainment to get people ready for the whole idea of masks and your identity being concealed by a mask. Then we have Snapchat and TikTok, these two apps which are very popular with young people. I know this because I have two daughters that are all over it. And so there's been a lot of preparation for young people, kids and young teenagers for the idea of wearing masks through these two platforms. And they presented you know, this fun idea of, wouldn't it be great to dress your face up in all these different identities, and you can design your own mask, and making the idea of masks cool and fashionable. So that's some more mind control that's been going on. And what I had here was an excerpt from the TV show Candid Camera, which I thought went out with the 1970s, but apparently they're still making it, which I was surprised to learn. And in a recent episode, I think it was from last year, or it may have been the early months of this year, you've got a scene, which again, if you want to view it half-time, I've got it on the other computer there, where there's various people in this restaurant. And the big joke is that the waitress comes up to take their order and she's got a face mask on. And the people at the table are a bit creeped out like this, and they're like, oh, can I ask why you're wearing the mask? And she just says, oh, I just feel safer like this, it's just safer for me to wear a mask. And then the chef comes out from the kitchen and he's wearing a mask. And these people are like, what's going on? Why is everyone wearing masks? And then the manager of the venue comes out and he's wearing a mask. And you know, the idea is that these people are getting very creeped out and they're feeling very uncomfortable being in this restaurant with all the staff wearing masks. And then at the end they reveal, oh, it was just a stunt for Candid Camera, folks, that's all it was. But, you know, at this point, it was still considered creepy and a bit weird for everyone to be walking around in masks. So how that's changed, and what a powerful job of propaganda and mind control has been done, to the point that now if you don't wear a mask, you're considered weird and odd, and you're the one that stands out. You know, I stopped at a motorway services on the way up here, and I was literally the only person not wearing a mask. So now it's you that stands out if you choose not to go along with this. This was interesting because the latest James Bond movie, titled No Time to Die, was due to be released on the 2nd of April. I did a presentation earlier in the year on occult elements of the James Bond stories, and Ian Fleming himself, the creator, who had a background in British military intelligence. So very early when this whole COVID pandemic kicked off, we were told that this film had been put back to November. So the makers had decided to scrap the April release, and they were now going to put it into cinemas in November. So they seemed very confident that in November people would actually be able to go to cinemas to watch this film. And obviously they stood to lose multiple millions of dollars if this film flopped, considering the production costs that have to be covered. So they seem quite confident that by releasing it in November, they're going to be able to recoup their outlay. So I guess that's kind of an encouraging sign that we might be able to go to cinemas in November. I know they're open now, but do they know something that we don't? Because it seems the general public is always the last to know in these things. Everybody else seemed to. This is a reference to V for Vendetta, released in 2005. And just to read the description of it here, it's about a totalitarian dictatorship that gains its power by creating a society of fear due to an alleged virus. Sounds familiar. Spreading throughout the world. In the film, the media pushes fear-based propaganda on the television screen of every household. It's kind of reading like an instruction manual now. The authoritarian dictator promises security but not freedom. The constant theme of "this is for your safety" is repeated throughout the film. Most importantly, the film ends with society waking up, hallelujah, and the corrupt fascist regime is dismantled. Music to my ears. What year is the film set? 2020. Now that's one I wouldn't mind coming to pass.
Brilliant film.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
The Georgia Guidestones. So an interesting thing about this year, 2020, is that 20 plus 20 is 40. And if we go back 40 years, we find ourselves in 1980. And specifically, if we go to the 22nd of March 1980, that is the date on which the Georgia Guidestones were initially unveiled. Interestingly, it was the week of that date, round about the spring equinox of this year, 21st, 22nd of March, when many European countries were first put into lockdown. So in the UK, we had the announcement on the 19th of March that all the schools were going to have to close the following week. I remember it well. And then we had the announcement that pubs would have to shut at midnight on the 20th of March, and then on the 23rd of March we got the announcement that we have to lock down and everyone has to stay inside. So all these dates are pinned around the spring equinox, and I have noticed that a lot of significant world events happen around that date, 21st, 22nd of March, going all the way through to the 1st of May, a very important date on the occult calendar, Walpurgisnacht and Beltane, May Day. So you often find that many world-changing narratives occur between the spring equinox and the 1st of May, and that was the most intense period of lockdown, and there was lots of fear, lots of paranoia, because people at that time just didn't know what was happening. So the Georgia Guidestones were unveiled more or less 40 years to the day before we all got put into lockdown. Another interesting thing about the date is that when you express it in its American format, it's 322. And 322 is a number that's associated with the Skull and Bones secret society fraternity coming out of Yale University, which is steeped in occult ritualistic activity. So these Georgia Guidestones were said to have been commissioned by a man who gave his name only as R.C. Christian, which some people think might be referring to Rosicrucian Christian. Very little is known about where they came from, but they appear to be a kind of wish list for the elite controllers of humanity in terms of what they hope to achieve. And I think they have demonstrated incredible levels of patience, because they've waited 40 years from when these were unveiled to wheeling out the plan that we've had this year. And the most significant of the inscriptions would be the one that states their goal of maintaining humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. So major population reduction. Who mentioned Bill Gates? We get onto him in part 2. So this has, for a very long time, been on the wish list of the so-called elite controllers. There's said to be somewhere around 7.5 billion people in the world, and they want it down to 500 million, a reduction of 6.57 billion people. Quite an audacious plan. So it would appear that this whole virus narrative has certainly got rid of a few, from all the old folks that have been dying in the so-called care homes and the suicides, not to mention any genuine deaths that there may have been from COVID, and I still can't work out whether it's a real thing or not. But it appears that there's a direct interplay there between this inscription on the Georgia Guidestones of 40 years ago and what is now happening in 2020. Ah, here he is. I knew he was there somewhere. The famous quote from Bill Gates, rather more than just a nerdy computer guy who invented Microsoft, if he even did. In our kind of circles, he's more recognised as a eugenicist who's hell-bent on population reduction. And here's his famous quote of 2010, this was at a TED talk that he did 10 years ago, where he stated the world has 6.8 billion people, that's headed up to about 9 billion. Now if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 to 15%. So he's giving you an insight into the mindset of a eugenicist there. One of these crazed psychopaths who think they have the godlike right to dictate who lives and who dies. And just imagine the hubris and the arrogance of somebody thinking that they are in a position to make that kind of decision for the rest of humanity. But that's how these people, and I use that term loosely, really think, and they've really showed their hand with it this year.
So you know the prick.
Exactly. And the virus, the vaccine. That awkward moment when you realise the nerdy computer guy is actually trying to kill you. So I've been writing about Bill Gates for many years and his true nature. He's a real example of a lifetime actor. Most people think of him as, you know, a computer guy or a philanthropist. That's something they always hide behind. You know, the Rothschilds are said to be philanthropists, and the Rockefellers were, and they have these foundations and these institutes, and it makes them look like they're really caring people. Bill Gates is this billionaire philanthropist that just gives so much of his money to good causes because he cares, you know, big-hearted Bill. But again, it's just satanic inversion, where the truth is in a 180-degree opposite direction to what we're being presented. Bill Gates is not a philanthropist, he's actually trying to kill you. And here he is at the centre of the web in this whole coronavirus situation. So many of the organisations that are embroiled in this whole thing, from the Gavi group, Boris Johnson pledged several £million of government money to the Gavi group in developing a vaccine for this whole thing. Bill Gates was involved in that group. He's involved in funding for the CDC, the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, you name it, Bill Gates has got a hand in it. He's personally funded Chris Whitty, the so-called medical expert on this whole thing in the UK. Same thing with Anthony Fauci in the US. Wherever you look, Bill bloody Gates is there. And he was involved in this, sure enough. Event 201, so we're getting into real-world examples. If the predictive programming and popular culture vehicles is too much for certain people to place any credibility in, then explain away some of this stuff. Event 201 was this preparedness exercise that took place in New York in October of 2019. I was in New York that very weekend, interestingly. I had no idea this was going on. So across town, you had the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in conjunction with the Johns Hopkins University and the World Economic Forum, and they're running this event discussing what we would do should there be a major pandemic that came along and affected the whole world. You know, just in case one ever did come along, and what sort of things would we have to implement? And they've got various experts talking about how they would have to respond by way of transport and education and shutting shops down and making sure essential supplies get through and making sure government propaganda is put into the newspapers and the television and all of this. They're discussing these different facets of it. An interesting thing at the end of it, I had a video clip of it, is the woman summing up at the end of the day says, right, so that's all settled then, we've now discussed what we all need to do when the pandemic hits. So probably a bit of a Freudian slip there. She probably meant to say if the pandemic hits, or should a pandemic hit, but she says when the pandemic hits, because they knew damn well it was coming. And this was 2 months before we're told this thing was generated out of Wuhan, China, and then it spread around the entire world. Then we have this document from September 2019, just the month before. It was called A World at Risk, the annual report on global preparedness for health emergencies, coming from the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board. A nice little picture of COVID down in the corner there. And this document goes through all the same things that Event 201 did. It's preparedness, should there be a pandemic at any time in the future. Then we have, I think this is an excerpt from that document actually, Preparing for the Worst, a rapidly spreading lethal respiratory pathogen pandemic. More measures that would have to be outlined. Scenario narratives, Lockstep. This is from a document coming out of the Rockefeller Foundation from 10 years ago. It's known as the Lockstep Document, appeared in 2010, Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development. And this excerpt specifically applies to a fictional situation where we've got a virus sweeping around the world 10 years later. And here's some excerpts from that document, again detailing what needs to be done. So these are real world documents, they are available on the web, anyone can access them, and you know, if anyone is still going to put all this down to coincidence, then I've got some beachfront property in Birmingham that they might want to buy. From 2019 again, this is going back to January of 2019, we have what is known as the CARES Act coming out of the US government. And it was filed in January of 2019, and it specifically applies to the COVID-19 situation that we now have. But, you know, the big problem with it is that this was produced in January 2019 and the virus didn't come along until December, and we're not supposed to know that it was coming because it was one of these random things that just happened to mutate. and yet there's clear foreknowledge of it at the very start of last year, because this act was created in preparation for it. And then, I can't read that. Oh yeah, another document, this one dating back to 2018, the previous year, COVID-19 diagnostic test instruments and apparatus, and there you've got a patent number, exports by country. So this document is from 2 years ago, 2018, and it's specifically referring to COVID-19 diagnostic test instruments. Again, in 2018, COVID-19 is not supposed to have been known about. It's not supposed to have been any kind of a thing, because we didn't know it was coming, right? Well, we didn't, but it seems every other party involved in this did. And we have so many proofs of it. We had Dr. Anthony Fauci, who's wheeled out always as the medical expert on such matters in the United States. In 2017, he made a speech, got a video clip of it there, where he said this incoming administration, Donald Trump's first term, will have to deal with a major epidemic. That's what he said. Not may have to, but will have to. In 2017, 3 years before this happened. So Fauci was in a position to know what was coming, because he's a key player from within those circles. He's been around since the 1980s. And unfortunately, he's a very trusted household name in the United States. You know, Dr. Fauci is like this reassuring figure that people look up to and respect, because he's a doctor, you know, and he always tells us what we need to be doing. He advised on the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s, and he's been around in office ever since. But it's been pointed out that every year that there's an election in the United States, there just happens to be a pandemic that comes along before it. And here are some examples, going all the way back to 2004. Kind of revealing that. Then we have the interesting situation, which takes some explaining away, of why the CEOs of so many major corporations all quit their posts at the end of 2019 or in the very early part of 2020. Here's just a few of the corporations that lost their heads, apparently in preparation for what was known to be coming. 2019 had the most CEO departures on record at more than 1,600. Did you get the impression they knew something was coming and they were trading in their stock or just getting the hell out of there in preparation for it? As always, the public is the last to know, but we bloody know about it now. And something that I observed a while back is that an anagram of coronavirus just happens to be virus or a con. Could that be a clue as to what's going on here? I mentioned this at the end of the talk. I think there's some copies of this floating around. It's Nick Kollerstrom's book. I think it's one of the first books that's appeared on this whole scamdemic. He's titled it The Great British Coronavirus Hoax, and it's a very good account of how this whole thing was pulled off in the very early weeks and months. He's done a really good job of breaking it all down. So that book's out there doing the rounds. I suspect there are going to be many more books on this in the coming months. I've started writing Musical Truth Volume 3, and there's going to be a major chapter there on how this coronavirus situation plays into the music industry. Some of the examples you've had today, but there's many more. So that is the end of the first part. In the second part, I'm going to be looking at other events that have been happening behind the smokescreen of COVID-19. So while everybody's been obsessing about virus this, virus that, virus the other, has there been anything else happening in the world that's not really been getting reported, but is worthy of our attention? So I'll be addressing that in part 2. If anyone wants to see the videos that were missing, I've got them over on the computer here. Just a quick plug for the books. I've got all my books there and my t-shirts. And my daughter, my 11-year-old daughter, has got me on the hustle. She's produced a load of these bracelets from Moon Bands, and she said, "Dad, whenever you go out and do any of your talks, could you try and shift some of my Loom Bands for me?" So these are just for donations if anyone wants one, but feel no pressure on that.
Can I just mention one thing before you?
Yeah.
Sure. Do you remember last year, a big product that was being advertised was called Portal?
It's called what?
And it was a bit like Portal. It was like a video camera thing, where you could do Zoom to your mother, you know. So it was like...
if you ever found yourself shut in your house for months on end.
No, this was last year, and the son turned up with a bunch of flowers for his mother. She turned up with this item called a portal. Just looks like a photo frame.
Yes.
And then months later, the flowers, well, obviously the flowers had died. chocolate's got it sort of thing. And there was daughter talking to mother. She's cooking a meal, and it's all. Oh, you know, she made the best present, didn't she?
Yeah,
you know, but it's like
2 to the packers now. What the one
so
family has one, and that
very
family
convenient
has the other
timing.
one.
So did
It goes through the television or something.
So I think that was another way of programming.
Yes.
For this.
It's funny that advert hasn't been on the telly for a long time.
It hasn't.
It was on it before lockdown a lot.
As if the flowers and everything else didn't matter, but this piece of machine.
So you could keep in touch with your mother.
Well, if I haven't convinced you that there was foreknowledge of this whole thing with that, then there's nothing more I can tell you, really. And that's why I say that presenting this to normies could be a very valuable thing, because who can deny this, really? Who can deny it? Okay, part 2. Everyone ready?
Yeah.
So, this section is jumping ahead of myself there. This section is all about other things that have been going on these past few weeks and months that aren't directly connected to COVID-19. So a good bit of advice that was given to me a long time ago was, when the mainstream media is kind of coercing you to look in a particular direction and is saying pay attention to this, it can often be very revealing to look in opposite directions to where you're being directed. And when the news bulletins every single day for weeks and months on end are all about COVID, 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 and they're scaring the bejesus out of people with all these so-called death figures and introducing all these measures that we all got to undertake, it can be interesting to look at other things happening in other directions where they don't necessarily want you to look. So there seem to have been quite a few examples of this year. And a good place to start would be to ask the question, what has happened to the royal family? Because to my thinking, something has. So we had the Queen delivering 2 public service announcements early on in this whole narrative. I think one was in April and the other one was in May. I may have got the dates wrong. But this is unheard of, because normally she just pops up at Christmas with a pre-prepared propaganda message. And we've had 2 unexpected appearances from her on the TV. And the last one seemed to be very final. It had a very final air about it. It felt like she was saying goodbye. And she was saying things like, we'll meet again, and we'll be with friends and family again. There was some World War II overtones to it, I felt. She was kind of evoking the spirit of Vera Lynn with we'll meet again. And then a few weeks later we hear of Vera Lynn passing away. When Boris Johnson, in the very early days of this, was being wheeled out to make public announcements, it felt to me as if he was being framed as a kind of Winston Churchill type figure, who was there to lead the British nation through these hard times. I wouldn't say he's done the best job of that. And then, of course, you know, poor old Boris went down with the virus himself, didn't he? In terms of what we're asked to believe. But there seemed to have been a few World War II overtones to what was going on there. So we had these messages from the Queen, and it felt as if she was saying goodbye. And then we start to get headlines like, will we ever see the Queen in public again? And then other newspapers are saying, don't expect to see the Queen out and about. At 94 years of age, she's in the at-risk category of catching the virus, and so she's got to self-isolate. As an example to us all, you know, because if the Queen can do it, you can stay at home as well. And same thing with Boris Johnson. It was to enforce the idea that anyone can get this thing, even the Prime Minister. But we've been kind of prepped to get used to the idea that the Queen is gone. And this raises the question of, in what way has she gone? Is she dead? Has she been arrested? Which is a suspicion that many researchers into certain things have, as we'll discover. Has she been overthrown by Joseph Gregory Hallett? You might be familiar with this guy, this New Zealander that's come forward. For many years, actually, he's been claiming that he's the rightful heir to the British throne. And he's been claiming that the so-called British royal family has been illegitimate for the past 150 odd years. And that during Queen Victoria's time, the royal lineage, the bloodline, was usurped by the Rothschilds, and it got steered off in a completely different direction. And the family tree that we've had presented to us is completely bogus. So the Queen is in no way a legitimate monarch. That's his argument. He claims that he is, and he's taken the name King John III.
What happened to King John II then?
I have no idea.
Doesn't matter.
He claims to be the fourth.
No, it doesn't matter.
Last thing when he's not a king.
So I don't know if this guy is genuine or not. My leaning is towards him not being the real deal. There was a video put out by his mother and two of his sisters, and they were denouncing his claim to be in any way of a royal bloodline. They were saying he's a fantasist, he's delusional, he was part of a mind control cult, he's got a background in military intelligence. So I don't place too much stock in his claims myself, but we're still left with the question of what has happened to the Queen, because to my thinking she has gone. There were some exercises in damage limitation that seemed to be going on early on in all of this, and after the initial announcement that she was going to have to quarantine and not be seen out in public, we got this picture of her allegedly riding her horse within the grounds of Windsor Castle, and this was put out in April. April, you might recall, was a very warm month. And the week in which this picture appeared, it was very, very hot, unusually warm for the time of year. So I would ask, is this the kind of dress that you would wear on an exceptionally hot day? Or is it more likely that this is a stock picture from some time before that was wheeled out for propaganda purposes to create the idea that all is well in the royal camp and the Queen is here in Windsor Castle? So many of these headlines have come forward over the weeks, including this one, Has the Queen Left London Forever? And then we get the story that up to 250 royal staff are offered voluntary redundancy amid doubts the monarch will return to Buckingham Palace. So they're making out that she's basically going bankrupt from this whole virus situation, and all the staff at Buckingham Palace have had to be laid off. Certainly there are some interesting things when you... Where are we? Yeah, when you go to Buckingham Palace. This was observed actually in October of 2019. The royal crest and seal, which used to appear there on the gate of Buckingham Palace, disappeared. I think the date on which it was noticed was the 2nd of October 2019. So it predates the whole coronavirus stuff by a few months. This is consistent with Greg Hallett's claims that Queen Elizabeth has abdicated and ceded her power to him. That's his claim. And he points to the royal crest and seal disappearing as backing that up. So something has to account for this. The official story is that a delivery van backed into it and accidentally knocked it off, and it's not been replaced since. But given that these are the main tourist gates to Buckingham Palace, would a delivery van really be coming to these gates, or is it far more likely it would have gone round the back somewhere? I think it probably is. So, as well as the Queen, we have the question of what has happened to Prince Philip. And I am reminded of this very telling quote that he made in 1988 in an interview, where he stated, "In the event that I'm reincarnated, I would like to return as a deadly virus." I thought he already was. In order to contribute something to solve overpopulation. So we're into the Bill Gates eugenicist mindset again here. These people feel that the world is overpopulated and they have a God-given right and status to do something about it. And here he is giving us a glimpse into the way he really thinks by making this statement. So very interesting that we now do have this virus situation, and it's a throwback to that comment he made in 1988. But I wonder what's happened to him. So we were told that a few weeks ago it was Prince Philip's 99th birthday, and this picture was wheeled out by the press. It alleges to be the Queen and Prince Philip in front of Windsor Castle to mark the occasion of his 99th birthday. Now, I'm no expert in Photoshop, but I know a lot of people who are, and many people have messaged me to say that this is a photoshopped mock-up, and the two of them have been placed in front of that backdrop. These Photoshop experts have pointed to all kinds of telltale signs around the edge of the figures to indicate that this is a mocked-up photograph. So why would they feel the need to do this if all is well in the royal camp and the Queen and Prince Philip are still there and it's business as usual? What could have happened to them? Now that was a video snippet of what purported to be an interview on Sky News from back in the spring with Prince Charles. There's only one problem with it. It wasn't Prince Charles. They wheeled out an actor, a double, not much of a double though, it turns out, and to me it was obvious to see straight away. And when you place this actor who appeared in the Sky News broadcast side by side with, well, I think it's the real Prince Charles, you can see a lot of very glaring differences. You get shots of him from the back and his bald patch is missing for a start. So a very poor choice of actor and double, I would say, and many people I know messaged Sky News after this broadcast asking why you have put an imposter out on this interview, because it wasn't Prince Charles. I'm not sure they got any kind of a response, but there would have to have been a reason why they felt the need to put a double out on this interview. So then, what happened to Prince Charles? So there's Greg Hallett, we've discussed him. Then we get on to Prince Andrew and his association with Jeffrey Epstein. His interview where he attempted to defend his relationship with Epstein was towards the end of last year as well, around about the time when that Royal Crest and Seal disappeared off the Buckingham Palace gates actually. And so that was an exercise in damage limitation, a very poorly judged one by most people's standards, where he just made himself look even more culpable and didn't do himself any favours in the way that he conducted himself, showing no remorse, taking care to mention that on the date where he's alleged to have had this sexual relationship with his alleged victim, Virginia Roberts, he had taken the kids to a Pizza Express restaurant in Woking. So it wasn't enough just to mention that it was a restaurant, it seemed very important for him to get the pizza bit in there. And this of course ties into the whole Pizzagate subject, which emerged towards the end of 2016, all connected with child trafficking and paedophile networks and connections into politics and various other aspects of the establishment and so-called elite circles. So it appears that things aren't over for Prince Andrew. I hear that he's still being called upon to answer to American courts as to his true relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, so I bet he's learnt to sweat now. And then we have Epstein with Ghislaine Maxwell there, who was reportedly arrested a few weeks ago, so that's quite interesting, and I'm sure there's still some fallout from that event that we're to hear about. This comes from unsealed documents connected to Ghislaine Maxwell, stating Bill Clinton was at Epstein's Island with Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell and 2 young girls. So that kind of puts Bill Clinton into the frame there, along with all the other names that have been associated with Epstein, including, incidentally, Bill Gates, whose name crops up on the flight log for the Lolita Express, the plane that took all the guests to Epstein's private island. There's a great many very familiar names on that list. And I like to think it will eventually serve to bring about Bill Gates' undoing. Anything that achieves that is good for me. Bill Gates in jail is a big fantasy of mine. So we get on to the whole subject of Q. QAnon, the Q plan. And if people thought flat earth divided opinion and pitted friend against friend, brother against brother, then the Q plan ramps it up by a factor of another 100, I think. This really does prove a major division among people in the truth alternative scene. From my experience, and I get messages about it every day, I get a whole load of correspondence now as a result of the videos that I do, and gauging what people are saying to me, there seems to be pretty much a 50-50 split between people who think the Q plan is a massive psyop, a stand-down exercise designed to create the impression that you've got this group working for the betterment of humanity. They're working to bring down the so-called deep state cabal from the inside. They're working to arrest many of these key players. They're holding paedophiles and child traffickers to account, and they're rescuing children who are said to have been kept in underground bases, DUMBs, deep underground military bases, and tunnel systems beneath many of the major cities in the world. The story is that there is a plan which is already underway, and it's taken place to a very large degree, where these children are being rescued and brought to the surface and the tunnels are being destroyed. So about half the people that I speak to seem to think that this is some kind of disinformation psyop cooked up by maybe the CIA just to give the impression that all this stuff is going on, while the other 50% will say that it's a very real and valid thing, and by its very nature it has to be covert, it has to be secretive, it can't come out and directly reveal what's going on. So the communications that are coming from this individual that is said to be Q, and people are speculating as to the identity of this person or persons working with this group. The story is that Q is working in very close collaboration with Donald Trump, which a lot of people seem to have problems with. Trump himself divides opinion. A lot of people just think he's a clown and just a sleazy buffoon, you know, just an actor. And a lot of other people seem to think that he's a goodly, godly individual with good intentions who really is the best president the United States has had since John F. Kennedy. So my own position on it is that I'm very much on the fence. You might make the claim that it sounds wildly improbable that there would be underground tunnels with children being kept in where they've been sexually abused and horrific things have been getting done to them. It sounds wildly improbable that there's been rescue missions to bring them to the surface and destroy these tunnels. But then again, if you told somebody at the start of this year that by the summer they'd be standing behind bits of tape in the supermarket, going around in one-way systems with bits of cloth strapped to their face, and that they would be staying in their house for months on end and waving at their mum through a Zoom call screen, they'd have said that's wildly improbable as well. So the experiences of 2020 so far, I think, have taught us that anything is possible and nothing is off the table in terms of possibilities. So when it comes to the Q plan, I'm closely and curiously observing it from the outside, and I'm seeing a few things happen which are consistent with what we're being told is going on. The idea is that if and when Donald Trump gets re-elected for his second term in November, I'm looking at the competition, Sleepy Joe Biden, who fell asleep on a television interview just this last week and was snoring away when the interviewer came to him. There's not a whole lot of competition. It almost feels like Biden has been put there as security for Donald Trump getting voted back in this election, because he's no kind of competition at all in reality. So the idea is that when Trump enters his second term after November, things are going to ramp up very rapidly, and we're really going to start to see some recognisable action in terms of these high-profile people being arrested and revelations being made as to what's really been going on with elite child trafficking and the adrenochrome industry and all of this. We'll get on to that.
Does this not explain where the Queen went to? That Q? Is that not her?
What's that?
The Queen does that explain?
Oh, Q.
Does that not explain her disappearance?
Well,
no, I'm just being facetious.
It's only speculation. Everything is speculation. So many researchers into the Q story will tell you that the likes of the Queen have already been arrested and are being held to account for their crimes. There's certainly a story surrounding the Queen and Prince Philip going back to 1964 when they made a visit to Canada. This is the whole basis of the work of a guy called Kevin Annett and an organisation called International Tribunal Against Church and State. And the story is that the Queen and Prince Philip visited a children's home in British Columbia in Canada and took a bunch of children out on a picnic, and they were never seen again. And you know, you can draw your own conclusions as to what may have happened there. So these accusations of the Queen and Prince Philip being involved in sexual abuse and pedophilia have followed them around for many years, and many people seem to think that she may well have been arrested as part of this plan. And there are some very high profile names that we hear are going to be held to account as well. We hear that Guantanamo Bay, the military prison in Cuba, has been kept open specifically for this purpose, for military tribunals of the worst offenders in all of this. And we're told that in the months to come we're going to get revelations of this nature. Of course, at this stage there is no way of knowing. It's open to individual interpretation and speculation. This is the infuriating thing about the Q plan. You know, people will say it's bullshit, people will say it's a psyop, but you can't actually say with any certainty that it is. But similarly, you can't say with any certainty that it's a real and valid thing. I guess we are going to have to wait. So many researchers and many commentators on this subject are of the view that it connects into the Kennedy family, and that Donald Trump is very much continuing the work that JFK was doing leading up to his assassination in 1963. And there is suspicion among some that JFK Jr., JFK Sr.'s son, who is said to have died in a plane crash on the 16th of July 1999, in some way faked his death and has been working behind the shadows underground for the last 21 years on this plan, which is all coming to fruition in 2020. The idea among these researchers is that the cabal, you know, the deep state, the control system, launched their coronavirus narrative at the start of this year, and the Q team saw that as an opportunity to work under this as a smokescreen to conduct these arrests and these tunnel clearances and such. As I say, it can sound wildly fantastic and improbable when you hear about this, but I really think we're going to have to wait and see how it pans out before we can draw any significant conclusions on it. This is an aerial view of John F. Kennedy Sr.'s burial site, which could be said to be in the form of a Q, and that's been seen as symbolic by many that are following this narrative in terms of implicating JFK Jr. in the whole Q and Trump plan. So another piece of evidence that people have pointed to is that many world leaders appear to have capitulated to Donald Trump in terms of acknowledging his status as somebody that is going to conduct this plan. The idea is that the NSA, working as part of the American government, has gathered a whole load of data and emails and telephone call recordings of many of these elite perpetrators arranging their business and, you know, completely putting themselves in the frame through the communications that they've made. And that Trump is now in possession of this, and that he's been using it to coerce various leaders around the world into cooperating with him and capitulating to his power. And one piece of evidence that is pointed to is when he visited Buckingham Palace and there was an inspection of the guards and Trump walked in front of the Queen. And the way this was portrayed in the mainstream press was, what an oaf, what a buffoon this guy is. You know, he didn't even observe the official protocol. He's supposed to stand behind the Queen in deference to her, but he walked in front of her and she was forced to walk around him. So this is the way the mainstream media have pretty much portrayed Trump since day one. He's had some very bad press. We haven't seen this with other presidents. For instance, George W. Bush, who was pretty much a village idiot who could barely tie his own shoelaces, and he was a psychopathic little warmonger as well. But I don't recall him getting the kind of press that Donald Trump does. He was never derided and ridiculed and criticised in the press, generally speaking. He got very favourable press, whereas Donald Trump is constantly mocked and lampooned and criticised by the press all over the world, which does tend to suggest that he might well be a bit of a loose cannon, a bit of a maverick, not your average puppet stooge president. And maybe that 2016 election victory of his was something that took the cabal by surprise. And maybe there was an expectation that it would go to Hillary Clinton, and when it didn't, it was the start of their plans starting to go awry. So that's the way this situation was covered in the press, that Trump is just this buffoon that doesn't know how to observe protocol. And there's a picture of him meeting the Pope, and Trump looks very happy with himself at how the meeting's gone, and the Pope looks anything but. So one thing which occurred back in the spring of this year was major news that ordinarily should have made headlines all around the world, but it was completely ignored by the mainstream media, who acted as if it just never happened. And this was the Federal Reserve Bank was brought under the remit of the US government and merged with the US Treasury, with Donald Trump as its de facto head. This is major news because since its creation in 1913, the Federal Reserve has been a cartel of private bankers, very much connected into the Rothschilds. It's operated outside of the jurisdiction of the American government, but it's provided the financial system to it, and the government has, you know, kind of answered to the Federal Reserve, who are unaccountable to it in any way. So the news that this has now been brought out of the hands of private bankers under the control of the government is very major news, but as I say, it was covered only by the alternative media and completely ignored by the mainstream. That should tell you something. It's a pretty major story. Then there was talk of so-called Obamagate, which is implicating Barack Obama and his husband Big Mike, who Michelle Obama, it turns out, is a man. There is evidence to show that his real name is Michael LaVaughn Robinson, known to his friends as Big Mike. So that's Obama's husband. But anyway, Obamagate is this political scandal involving allegations of the Obama administration spying on aspects of the Trump administration as that election date was approaching in 2016, and various other improprieties. And Trump is going after Obama through various legal cases and stuff, and we haven't heard the last of this. So again, this is pretty major news. I don't recall the BBC covering this in too much detail, or indeed any other mainstream outlets. What is that? Yeah, so that was a video which may well be quite revealing. It shows you what Donald Trump really thinks of social distancing and all these measures that have been brought in to combat the coronavirus. So it's a video of Trump and the US Attorney General Bill Barr, and they're there with Deborah Birx, and she's giving a lecture about social distancing measures and all these things that need to be done for the virus. And Donald Trump and Bill Barr are just smirking away like a couple of schoolboys and not taking the whole thing seriously at all. And then Trump says, I have a question. Normally down the front in these press conferences, you have a whole load of the media who sit here and they don't really like me and they always give me a hard time and stuff. So does this mean they're not going to be able to sit here anymore and they have to move further back? And, you know, he and Barr just exchanged this smirk between them, which shows that they're just taking the piss out of the whole thing and they know it's all bollocks. So Donald Trump, I feel, is not taking the coronavirus situation seriously. He knows it's a scam, he knows it's a big put-up job, but for the moment he has to be seen to be playing along with it. And he has talked of things like vaccines, and then in the next breath he will talk of hydroxychloroquine as a medical alternative to vaccines to treat the virus. But I feel that as he's trying to win that vote in November, at this stage in the game, he's got to be seen to be saying all the right things, giving certain factions of the American public what they want to hear. But once he's back in November, which looks like it's going to happen, we could see some major changes and some major revelations there. But this video really stands as evidence that he's not taken the whole thing seriously at all, and he realises it's just something that he's inherited. Then you have Dr. Anthony Fauci, and officially he's done many flip-flops. One minute he tells you masks are no good and they serve no purpose, the next minute he's saying everyone has to wear a mask. So I think this shows you how seriously Fauci has taken the whole situation of masks, as he sat there watching some sporting game with his mask pulled down. Do as I say, not as I do. And then we have Matt Hancock, less of the Han. And this is what Matt Hancock thinks of the rules and regulations that he's telling everyone else to adhere to in the country. Here he is ignoring social distancing guidelines. He was patting a fellow member of Parliament on the back, and there's been other pictures of him hugging colleagues, you know, when he's telling us that we can't see our mum and we can't go near members of our family because you've got a social distance. So of course they know it's all bollocks, they're not taking it seriously, they're mocking us. They must be having such a laugh at the vast overwhelming majority of the public doing exactly what they say and kowtowing to their every demand. This was a tweet from Angela Stanton King where she stated, "Truth bomb, this isn't about COVID-19 or Black Lives Matter." I'm not even addressing the Black Lives Matter Keith Floyd situation in this presentation because it's pretty clear, I think, that that was a set-up job and that was a psyop. I don't know if Keith Floyd was a real person. I don't know if he died or not, if he was a crisis actor. I don't know about the fine detail of it. But in terms of that whole exercise and what it was designed to achieve, it was supposed to be a distraction, and it was supposed to be another mind control propaganda exercise. And I would suggest that it flopped and it failed big time in terms of what it was expected to achieve. But anyway, in this tweet she states, "This isn't about COVID-19 or Black Lives Matter, this is a major cover-up for paedophilia and human trafficking. I wish people cared more about who's trafficking children than who's wearing a mask." And these subjects of child trafficking and paedophilia and the sexual abuse of children just keep on coming up. And we've had many of these protest demos in recent weeks, Save the Children, and all these different marches and protests that are all about drawing attention to these issues, particularly in California. And I think that's only going to continue. So running under the narrative of the coronavirus situation, well, most people are focused only on that and on the figures and the masks and the social distancing and the lockdowns. We've had this story of this subplot of paedophilia that's going on, and I think we're only going to hear more of this as the weeks progress and more of it leaks out. And so we've had many stories of low-level paedophiles, not household names, not people you've heard of, but these arrests have been happening, and there are accounts of them. Up to 450 paedophiles arrested a month in the UK. And then Germany investigates 30,000 suspects over pedophilia. There was another story from Germany just this past week of a major sting operation that took down a whole bunch of paedophiles there. So it's been happening on quite a massive scale, while everybody else is looking in another direction. And it may well be that post the November election, if there's validity to what we're hearing about Donald Trump's true role and what's happening with the Q group, we might get to hear of some of these big names. That's when you're going to hear of the likes of Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and Bill Gates, hopefully, and so many of these other big names. Cops bust human trafficking gang after arrest of 20 members. Spanish police smashed sub-Saharan human trafficking ring. You know, it's all over the place. And it's been making the headlines these past few weeks. So now we get into the whole sordid, disturbing, devastating subject area of the adrenochrome industry. And the idea here is that something that happens to these children who are kept captive by these psychopaths is that they have this chemical that is secreted by the human body known as adrenochrome harvested from them. And I don't want to get into the graphic detail of how that is done because it's truly horrific. But adrenochrome is supposed to have incredible life-giving properties. It's said to be highly addictive, more addictive than heroin. And it's said to be in wide circulation within the Hollywood film industry, within entertainment generally, within certain aspects of the music world, within the political world, within the world of big business, within religious institutions, and it's been going on for a very long time. In my first book, Musical Truth Volume 1, I detailed a whole load of the symbolism and the icons and the motifs that pertain to satanic ritual abuse and trauma-based mind control programming, which is very much linked to the music industry, it turns out. And I've kind of entrained myself to recognise these symbols when they appear in pop videos and movies and things like that. But it turns out there's a whole world of symbolism connected to adrenochrome. And when you see these cropping up in films and TV shows and music videos, it's a subliminal reference to this practice, which goes hand in hand with the satanic ritual abuse. So you often hear of references to rabbits, and particularly white rabbits. And when you look at the chemical constituents of adrenochrome, and you see a diagram of it, then it looks rather like a rabbit. I can't remember if I had a... yeah. So this is an expression of the chemical symbol here, and it's said to look like a rabbit with the extended ears there. So when you get references to rabbits in popular culture, it's said to often be a sly reference to adrenochrome. And then another one is fish, references to fish and fried fish, as per Madonna, sorry. And the video that she put out earlier in the year when she's under house arrest, she's singing into her hairbrush and she seems to be losing her mind. She's not keeping her shit together, she looks dreadful, and she's saying fried fish, we need some fried fish. And the idea here is that so many of these celebrities, I mean, have you seen Ellen DeGeneres lately? Looking absolutely horrific. The idea is that these celebrities, when they don't get their fix of adrenochrome, because they become so reliant on it, they deteriorate rapidly, and they really do start looking like shit, because the adrenochrome has properties that keep them youthful and just fill them with life and vitality. And we've got many examples of celebrities that just look like they've aged 100 years overnight, and so that's the suspicion of what's going on here. So there's a video compilation which I had of many of the references to adrenochrome that have appeared in Hollywood movies over the years, and it goes back decades. We're going back to the 1980s, 1970s, so it's obviously been going on for a very long time. I only really sort of discovered this subject area myself for the first time this year, and it's absolutely horrific. And if the truth ever gets out about this to the masses, by whatever means, the world is just going to lose its mind and not be able to cope with the trauma of this. What else have we got? This seems to have been a hoax. This came out a few weeks ago, and it alleged to be a book by the hip-hop industry mogul and part-time rapper, although he's appalling as a rapper, Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, Sean Combs, called The Adrenochrome Witch. And it's just interesting that this came out when it did. It's been denounced as a hoax. It was said to be retailing on Amazon for $100 a pop. And he's going into, you know, the whole subject of adrenochrome. And it appeared right at the time when there was a lot of talk of these rescue missions going on with these underground tunnels as part of the Q plan, and all these children that have been kept for their adrenochrome being allegedly rescued. So, you know, the timing is very interesting. Here's Lady Gaga, who put out an album just the other month, and this is a cover shot from it. So the album turns out to be called Chromatica, of all things. So some interesting wordplay going on there. Interesting that it's Lady Gaga. She is alleged to be involved with the whole adrenochrome situation. When it comes to adrenochrome and the wording of it, it's also interesting to note that Google have their web browser, their primary product, which is known as Chrome, Google Chrome, and a few years ago they released a piece of software which was known as Adreno. So out of Google you've got two products which together make up the word adrenochrome. Would that be coincidence, I would ask? Well, here we are, yeah, this is a reference to it. So the Google Chrome browser, and Google's graphics processing unit, released in 2009, was named Adreno. So we mentioned Joe Biden and whether he makes any likely president material for the upcoming election. Here's quite a telling tweet that came from Joe Biden to Barack Obama on the occasion of his 55th birthday. He says, "Happy 55th, Barack, a brother to me, a best friend forever." And on the bracelet thing there with the various designs that he's got, we have a slice of pizza. Isn't that nice? Going all the way back into the imagery connected with Pizzagate. Then we're getting into, you know, spirit cooking with the practicing witch Marina Abramovich, and these spirit cooking dinners, which news of which also appeared around about the time of Pizzagate, towards the end of 2016. And this ties into a venue which exists in Los Angeles known as the Cannibal Club, and they openly speak on their website of serving human meat. I don't know how they're able to get away with this, but this is an actual excerpt from their website where they boast about what they serve on the menu, and they name some of their celebrity patrons who this particular month of November included Katy Perry and Chelsea Clinton, also Anderson Cooper and Meryl Streep. There will be many, many more, I'm sure. This is a still from Katy Perry's Bon Appetit video, which made a great many none too sly references to cannibalism. So in the video, she's being prepared by chefs to be eaten. She's being rolled in flour and boiled in oil, and then at the end of the video you've got this pie with human body parts sticking out of it. So it's glorifying the idea of cannibalism to an audience of kids. Deeply sick stuff. All of this needs to come out. You know, it's been in the realms of alternative research for a very long time, but can you imagine how the general public would just lose their minds if there was a way of this getting out there to the masses? You know, we bemoan the fact that there are so many unthinking, compliant sheep out there that just are going along with this whole COVID thing, doing whatever the government tells them, believing everything that comes out of the BBC, and we say to ourselves, what the hell is it going to take to wake these people up and motivate them and get them to stop complying with their own slavery? Well, if they came to learn the scale of child abuse, child torture and child murder that has been going on, that's the one that's going to do it, because nobody's going to be able to not be moved by valid revelations that this has been going on with children. So if that information can get out into the mainstream, that's going to be the game changer, and there'll be no turning back from that. Over 10 years ago, everybody thought this guy was crazy, Mel Gibson, when he made the comment, "Hollywood is an institutionalised paedophile ring. It is a den of parasites who feast on the blood of children. Every studio in Hollywood is bought and paid for with the blood of innocent children." So 10 years ago, that would have sounded like the ramblings of a wild madman. But with what we've come to know, by the point that we've got to now, it no longer sounds so crazy. It just sounds like he was in the know back then, and he was trying to warn others of what was really going on. So just getting towards the end here, the purpose of this second section was to ask, you know, what's been going on under the smokescreen of COVID while everybody else is looking in that direction. I think there's enough evidence there to assume that something is going on. Whether that means that this so-called Q plan is valid, whether it means that Donald Trump is indeed working to take down these criminals and these paedophiles, I really don't know. That is only going to come in time. But it seems to me that the whole COVID obsession has been covering up a lot of this stuff and keeping attention away from it. So we'll have to keep an eye on how this one pans out. But some of this stuff is obviously horrific and disturbing, and I've just included this quote here: "My best dreams and worst nightmares have the same people in them." And this speaks to the fact that we've had such a traumatic year. Our daily existence has changed beyond all recognition to what it was before. We've all been put through the ringer on this, we've all suffered, we've all had great hardships to deal with, and you could look upon this as a complete nightmare. And when you pay attention to a lot of the stuff that gets bandied around in the alternative media, it seems like we're being frog-marched towards some absolute dystopian nightmare and that all our rights and freedoms are going to be taken away. But is there another way of looking at it? Could we in fact be on the cusp of humanity's greatest moment? And if all these revelations are put out there, and if many of these things that we've speculated on turn out to be true and turn out to actually happen, then this could be our finest moment, and we could have all been born for it. We could have all manifested into this reality at this point in the timeline to be a part of the most incredible moment humanity has ever witnessed in terms of throwing off this slavery, this tyranny, this oppression once and for all, and moving forward to you know, a whole better situation, whatever that may end up looking like. Something worth bearing in mind, I would suggest. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say. I hope that resonated with you. I hope that made some sense. I hope it gave you some food for thought. Again, the books are here if anyone's interested. And that's about it, so thanks for listening.
Any questions and answers?
We could do questions and answers, yeah.
Yeah.
Any
questions? Yes?
Yeah.
With regards to tunnels, the information on what the Southern Q sites are, that the tunnels are the ones for the prohibition. All the major cities have the tunnels to transport the drinks. So people say, oh, there couldn't be tunnels.
Right.
There were. It's been proven that the tunnels were there to seek the drink around, to sneak around the major cities.
Right, right.
So
the children in the tunnels?
The tunnels that are being used are the old prohibition tunnels.
Right.
For the children?
Well, a lot of the underground bases are deep underground military bases, you know, of the type of Area 51 that we hear about. And so many of the tunnels connecting these bases would be military grade. They would have been dug with who knows what kind of futuristic technology to be able to dig the tunnels out. And it's said that under pretty much every major city, New York, LA, Melbourne, London, you know, you've got these networks of tunnels. And this is the story we're getting for why Melbourne has been put under such a heavy lockdown.
Yeah.
And people are being told to stay indoors, and the police are getting very, very draconian out there. The idea is that there's a major clearance operation happening with the tunnels under Melbourne, and they want everyone away in their homes where they can't witness this and get in the way of it. I don't know if that's true or not, but you know, that's the idea that's being put forward for it. Same thing with Auckland in New Zealand. So when you hear of these cities being put under very heavy lockdown, there is a suspicion that these tunnels are being cleared. And we're getting explosions all over the place as well. People are reporting random explosions going off here and there. And that could be consistent with these tunnels and these bases being destroyed, being blown up, so they can never be used again. I don't know, but you know, this is what's being put forward. Yeah, at the back.
Do you think there's actually two, with secret societies, and these people are always entrenched in secret societies, do you think there's two factions working here? Do you think perhaps Donald Trump works for a different secret society than, let's say, the New World Order? The reason I say that is because the date he took over the Federal Reserve was the 27th of the 3rd, which is another sacred number, which is 273.
Right.
And if you add a 0.2 on there, it's the speed of light and absolute zero. And a friend of mine saying this is another like sacred number system that a different organisation uses. So do you think that might be two organisations working against each other?
I've heard that suggestion, yeah. I've heard the suggestion that there's different factions. You've got the kind of New World Order, Illuminati that we think we know about, all the usual names, but there could be this other faction, and Trump is a representation of that. Some people think that it's being deliberately allowed to happen because we're moving into a new era now where this other faction, whatever it is going to take over from the old faction, and there's going to be a complete reset in that way. I don't know. I wish I had the answers. But a question I've got is, if Trump is indeed doing all the stuff that we hear about and is working with Q and all these arrests are going to take place and all of this, and he does get in for a second term in November, what happens at the end of that term, at the end of his 4 years? Because if they don't have somebody else lined up with the same principles and values, then the cabal could just put one of their players back in and we get plunged right back to where we were before. So this is a question that I wanted to put to Charlie Freak. Many of you might be familiar with the researcher Charlie Freak. I've done a number of interviews with him on the Q situation, and Charlie's done so many shows. And he claims to have intel on the situation, and he claims that he gets information coming to him through meditation. But he is, evidently very clued up on the whole thing. That's a question I want to put to him. What provision is in place for what happens when Trump leaves office? And also, if all this is valid, what happens if Trump is assassinated? It seems to be a very delicate situation if we're just relying on this one guy. If he has a heart attack or is shot, then, are we completely fucked then?
Situation again.
Yeah.
And the link between Trump and Jared Kushner, that seems a bit concerning. His son-in-law, 666, the apartment block, all that type of thing. In Israel.
Yeah, it is a concern. It is a concern. And people have raised to me that apparently Donald Trump was virtually bankrupted in the early 90s, and he went to the Rothschilds for a financial bailout, and the Rothschild bankrolled him. So people have said, well, then he's indebted to the Rothschilds, and he's not going to have turned against them. It's all conflicting information, and I just don't know. I don't claim to have any of the answers.
Just linking to what you said there before was, if you look at the work of people like Brendan O'Connell and his nemesis Adam Green, they've looked into the Zionist stuff, and some of the stuff in the background there is when at the end of the 4 years it would be Jared Kushner and I've forgotten the name of that, the daughter of Trump, but them coming on, but we're not. I mean, a lot of people are not really looking into the Zionist thing because of all the stuff that goes with this, but it's a really fascinating area because Trump is really embedded in the whole Zionist project.
Yeah.
We've seen him at the Wailing Wall doing that bullshit there and all that other stuff.
As well.
This is where it gets really dangerous because there's massive power there with Israel, and you've got the links between China, Israel.
I usually end on this one, So just
it's just the links with China, Russia, Israel, and
people keep bringing that one to me as well. They say, there's a lot of explaining to do in terms of Trump's ties to Zionist Israel.
It's weird.
It doesn't look good, they say.
It's part of the big plan for the protocols of the learned elders of Zion.
Your head hurts, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, who wouldn't want to believe that the Q plan is real and all this good stuff is happening? It's just we've got these problems to overcome, these obstacles, these things that require some explanation, and it's very far from clear cut.
There's several researchers who say that apparently what had happened was 5 years before Trump got involved. There was a group of generals, this might be a less secret society, a group of generals met in America and they said, we can't keep sending our lads across to other countries to get killed and come back and be like treated as they are for money, for these families to make money. And they wanted to have a military coup, and then they said, no, we can't because this is America. So they wanted to find somebody who would represent them, put their opinions forward. They said, the Trump, what do you do? And he says, I'll do it to him, pay it. I don't want any money.
Yeah,
So
I've heard that.
That's a distinct possibility.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Just very quickly, you were in London last weekend, weren't you?
Yeah.
And it was a remarkable event. Would you like to say anything about London? How it was for you?
Well, I thought there was an incredible energy to the event. I found it very inspiring that so many people had come out. There was definitely, a lot of positive feeling there. I was very disappointed to hear in the week that there's been some bickering and some infighting among various factions, trying to claim credit for who organised it, and certain people falling out with other people. So unnecessary, If we can't all unite on the same page against a common enemy at this point in the game, it says a lot about our ability to organise ourselves. But I was very optimistic on the day. I've had all kinds of mixed days since. I've had some down days, I've had some up days, but that's the average week in my life.
Going back 20 years ago, I think people were travelling down to London. You had the 1 million man protest to stop the war. various stop the walk protests.
Yeah.
They're quite like it to come protest, they can gather intelligence, you go home and not much happens. It's like a steam release valve. They'll let you come, do your protest and piss off home.
Yeah, so you feel like you've
happens.
expressed yourself and you've done your bit.
Yeah, but the Million Man March was supposed to be 5 days. And they went down the one day and there was 20,000 or whatever. And they said, we'll get on the news and by Friday or
No, it was on a Saturday, I was there. There was a million people turned, they reckon there was over a million. BBC said it was 40,000.
That's right.
Yeah, they always
so
do.
That's the norm.
Yeah. But the idea was good, was going to escalate with the coverage by the press and nobody covered it. It was on RT, it was on Al Jazeera, but there was no press coverage. So
I know people say that protests don't really serve any purpose and it's just your way of letting off some steam. But I think it sends a very clear visual message that there are people that aren't buying the bullshit, there are people that aren't consenting, and there are people that respect their rights and freedoms. And you know, these things are observed, they are monitored, they're going to be keeping an eye on how many people do turn out. And you know, the figure that was put on London last weekend was around about 35,000.
How many were there?
Well, I think it probably was about 35,000.
What did the BBC say?
The BBC said 10,000.
10.
Yeah, but it's more like 35.
Yeah.
The protest in Berlin last weekend, in excess of 1 million people, mainstream media told you 17,000.
Mark, can I ask, you know the COVID Truth Tour?
Yeah.
Which parts are you covering?
Oh, well, I'm just going to be speaking at the Oxford one and both the London dates at the end of it. So this tour is going around on a tour bus like a rock group on tour.
It's coming to Newcastle.
Yeah, yes. I've got all the dates on there. So it's stopping at various different towns and cities, and they have speakers just trying to win over members of the public with information that they won't have heard before. It kicks off at 12 midday every day, so the idea is people are going to be on their lunch breaks and going about their business. And it's just an opportunity to hit them with information and material to try and win over some new hearts and minds, you know. So that's happening throughout the rest of September, and it finishes on the 26th and the 27th in London. Trafalgar Square again on the 26th, and then Hyde Park on the 27th.
Going back a bit, I wonder where Obama got his children from.
Yeah, I think they were foster children, and they were just they were given to him and Mike to give the impression that they were. They're not Obama's children. Obama's homosexual, and Michelle is Mike. So they haven't got.
Just on a light note there, that fella on the right, he looks like he can cook a mean pizza and fix your car.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I call these two Baal and Balender. And people have said this looks like Kevin Kline. Other people have said, oh, that's where Robin Williams went. But
is it true? You know, Fauci's wife, is it Ghislaine Maxwell's sister?
Well, I've heard Fauci's sister is Barbara Streisand, but you get some crazy claims out of it.
There seems to be quite a link with a certain tribe.
Yeah.
The Jews.
Okay.
You know.
Yeah. Well, they usually pop up, don't they?
Yeah.
It always comes back to the Jews, like, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Any more questions, guys?
Yeah, it's not quite suspect. Actually, I read somewhere that those two actually killed off. They abducted a load of African children with them.
I've heard that.
And they ended up killing them, and those two came back. And you look at the picture of her. Where she was originally, they're like two different people.
Yeah, they look nothing like the original Bill and Melinda. Yeah. So this was supposed to be in July 2013.
Yeah, that's it, 13.
If you go on Ancestry.com, it claims these two died in 2013.
Yeah.
And what's supposed to have happened is they were lynched by a bunch of Indians in response to the vaccines having damaged so many of their children. A mob came out and killed them, so the story goes.
Well,
and they've been replaced by...
picture of the original couple and then the two...
They look nothing like each other, Definite differences.
All right, it just remains for me to say thank you very much on behalf of Truth Seekers for coming up, Mark, and doing this wonderful speech again.
Brilliant. I'm gigging a bungalow, it's the first one I've done.
And as a way of thank you, I'd like to present you with this.
Thank you.
I thought you've done previous talks.
You've been down the bookshop again, haven't you?
Yeah, you've been down the bookshop. You've done previous talks on the Beatles, and you were going to do a talk on
Ian Fleming and James
Ian
Bond.
Fleming.
Yeah.
So
I had the Bond Girls book last time.
I'll send you that one. I'll send you the Bond one.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot.
And the other ones were 4 Beatles.
Ringo Starr. A book about Ringo. Wow.
Oh dear.
That is that big. There's more. There's that much to say about Ringo. Oh, it's all of it, is it? How is John Lennon's book that size and Ringo's that size?
A fairy tale.
Don't forget
about Thomas the Tank.
Ringo he played the drums and he voiced Thomas the Tank Engine. That's the end of the story.
You forgot Paul McCartney.
Paul McCartney. Wow. I say more about him in that. Yeah, great. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.